Today I'm going to talk about the death of Paul Walker. Now I have not broached this subject only because I'm waiting for everything to settle, waiting for the lawsuits and all that kind of stuff and the investigations and the aftermath. And it was only just recently that we got the final rulings. Everything has hashed out. So we'll get to that right after the commercial. Did you know that the average driver gets 9 traffic tickets in their lifetime? Look, I'll be the first to admit that I've taken maybe a couple of liberties with traffic laws back in the day. And of course, when I got caught, I had to go to court to fight the ticket, which was always a hassle. And each time that I lost my case, it meant big fines, points on my record, and higher insurance premiums. Eventually, I realized that nothing beats having a good attorney argue your case in court. So here's what you do. You download the Off the Record app to your phone and register for an account. And if you get a ticket, simply upload a photo of your ticket into the app and you will be quickly matched with a lawyer in your jurisdiction. Your lawyer will start working your case right away, and in most cases, you'll never have to set foot in a courtroom. Off the Record has a 97% success rate and a 4.9 star rating on Google. And guess what? They even offer a money-back guarantee if they aren't able to reduce the points or keep that ticket fully off your record. Best of all, I've arranged a 10% discount for all of my YouTube viewers, so download the app and register using the referral code FASTLIFE to receive 10% off your first case. So on November 30th, 2013, Paul was hanging out with his family getting ready for Christmas. A little after 2 p.m., he got a text that he was supposed to be at a charity event in Santa Clarita, so off he went. He jumped into his car and drove up there, and he was getting there toward the end of this charity event. And toward the end of the event, Roger Rodas, who was Paul's financial advisor, hopped into his red Porsche Carrera GT. Everybody knew that car, even Paul. In fact, it was one of Paul's dream cars. I remember talking to him about this car back in 2010 when I was at Willow Springs. Paul, in real life, was a giant gearhead, and by this time, he knew a fair amount about cars. In fact, when I ran into Paul at Willow Springs back in 2010, he was there driving several race cars, his own Porsche GT3, a Nissan R35 GTR, and a race-prepared BMW 3, and I think an R32. So at the end of the event, Roger offered to give Paul a ride in the car. Roger himself was a seasoned professional race car driver. He was no slouch. And Paul was happy to jump into his dream car, even just for a ride around the block. Sounds like a fun day, right? So what happened? They pulled out of the driveway, they turned onto Alta Vista Street, then made a right onto Constellation Street. Roger was looking for a piece of straight pavement. From there, they made a right onto Kelly Johnson Street. The weather was perfect that day. It was 75 degrees, but the day before it had rained throughout the morning. Because it hadn't rained in a while, that meant that the oil, the dust, and debris came up to the surface of the pavement. If you live in California, you know that the first day it rained, you have to be very careful. Secondly, we must remember that the tires on the car were 9 years old, way past their expiration date. Yes, tires have an expiration date. They absolutely do. I went through this with my Lamborghini, and I had to replace them. And the tires were cold. Yes, I know it was 75 degrees outside, but remember, all tires need some heat in them to perform properly. I learned this in my Audi RS4 one cold morning. Fortunately, I wasn't driving like a douchebag, but I felt it. So with Roger driving, they went on a little spin for a quick pull. I know, we've all done it, right? Roger did this though, knowing that his tires were old, they were expired, he knows that tires were cold, and he knew it rained the day before. So he did this also knowing that the Porsche is devoid of safety features that many other exotic cars have. No traction control, no ABS, all those kind of things, right? This guy was dancing with the devil. And he did this knowing that there had been many incidents with the CGT, including a frightening spin with Jay Leno, fatal accident at Auto Club Speedway 4 years before, which was on a prepared racetrack where traction is usually better than a public street. So he knew the dubious reputation of that car. So instead of doing just a 0 to 60 pull, Roger made the choice to do 93 miles per hour on a curving downhill road where the speed limit was 45 miles an hour. Now that's just, it's just reckless. When Roger and Paul pulled out of the event at about 3:15, the outcome was almost predictable. And then just a few minutes before 4 o'clock, I got a phone call telling me that Paul and Roger had been killed. and I was shocked. In fact, I thought the guy was, bull. I was so shocked. To this day, I don't even remember who called me. I think it was Sean Lee, but I can't remember, honestly. The earlier information was sketchy, but the caller said that Paul and Roger went for a quick ride in Roger's Porsche Carrera GT. Of course, by the year 2000, everybody knew about that car. When Porsche released the Carrera GT, it proved to be a handful. Walter Roll said, "It's the first car in my life that I drove that I feel scared." One wrong move and you're going to swap ends, and there was a lot of small accidents. People sliding off the road, spinning out, and all that kind of stuff. Jay Leno, who is a great driver himself and an expert mechanic, who frequents racing tracks and road rallies nationwide, spun out in a Carrera GT at the track at Talladega in 2005. There was another fatal Carrera GT crash at California Speedway in 2006, but that was a collision when they're coming out of the hot bit, so you can't blame that car for that at all. That case was settled out of court for $4.5 million, but it served to generate discussion that blamed Porsche for designing an especially lethal vehicle because the car does not offer electronic stability control. But these people buy these cars know this. The Carrera GT doesn't have ABS, it doesn't have traction control. Well, there is a system that kind of sort of acts like traction control, but it's limited to electronic engine interruption. That's it. It just shuts the engine down. There's no dynamic stability control. So when Roger lost control of the car, it veered to the left, then spun toward the right. They did 2 circles. It hit a concrete pole and a tree and the curb at 93 miles an hour. In less than a minute, the car started smoking and it shortly burst into flames. Autopsy reports on Roger showed that he had chest and head trauma. He died within minutes. Paul's autopsy showed several incidents of impact, and his burns were across 100% of his body. The injuries to Paul in the passenger seat were horrific. There was only remnants of the outfit that he was wearing that day. He was wearing a black t-shirt, black jeans, and gray boxer shorts. Walker was found charred and in a defensive pugilistic stance like this, curled up like this. In other words, he was still alive for a minute or two, but the traumatic injuries included a fractured left mandible, left clavicle, multiple rib and pelvic fractures, and a non-displaced spinal fracture. Paul's burns were so severe they couldn't tell what color eyes he had. It was that bad. It was horrific. So who was it at fault? In my opinion, Roger. He was a professional racer. He should have known better. He was negligent, in my opinion. He should have known that the tires were old and cold. He was going more than double the speed limit. He knew he would be driving on a public street rather than a racetrack with a prepared surface. So, like I said, he was dancing with the devil, in my opinion. A lawsuit was filed against Porsche. After court battles and without admitting any guilt, Porsche settled for $10.1 million paid to Meta Walker. She put that into a trust for charity. The state of Rodas was also sued. They also settled for $10.1 million for Meta Walker's charity trust. So who won? Nobody won. Everybody lost. In my opinion, Porsche should have made that car with more safety systems, or confine the car to racetracks, or at least require buyers to go through strenuous training to drive the car and buy the car. After all, this is not the first time people pointed fingers at Porsche. Don't forget, back in the 1980s, Porsche was tied up with lawsuits surrounding their Porsche 930 Turbo, a car that was eventually labeled the Widowmaker decades later. During Porsche's development of the CGT, they hired the professional Porsche racing drivers to test the cars, and like I said, what Walter Roll said earlier. The Porsche test drivers wrote reports on these cars, and they said the handling is absolutely poisonous. That's a quote. And this car will be a liability in the hands of anybody but a professional driver. And it's on record. I'm not making it up. I'm no attorney. But if I was the CEO of Porsche at that point, I would have reconsidered those choices. But it's too late. Too many people have been injured and killed. They eventually released the CGT anyway, and then there were some accidents, but most have been minor, thankful. Just ego things, you know. To this day, the Porsche Carrera GT is still in the news for safety issues. In fact, in April of 2023, Porsche issued a recall affecting 489 examples of the 1,300 Carrera GTs for potential catastrophic suspension failure. I don't pass any blame to Porsche. People who bought this car knew that this car is better in the hands of a professional. But people with big egos, big wallets, don't listen to that or don't pay attention to that. Years later, I started seeing social media claiming that Paul Walker had said, if one day speed kills me, don't cry because I was smiling. The rumor spread rapidly. Problem is, his attorney said, there's no proof that he ever said that. So I can assure you this, he was not smiling. He was terrified, and I think that fake quote is totally inappropriate. The lesson here is this: even when you're in a supercar with a professional race driver and you're doing hood rat on the public streets, you're not immune. Paul Walker was definitely the best ambassador for the tuner culture, I can tell you that. But now we're gone because of the negligent act of a driver who thought he had everything in control. So, sad thing. All right. Thanks for watching, everybody. We'll see you next week.